In 1906, a fire tore through the small town of Ashford, North Carolina. Dozens perished. But when the smoke cleared, townsfolk whispered of something more than flames. They said the fire was set to erase a secret buried in the walls of the Ashford Orphan House. This is the story you were never meant to hear. Ashford was not on most maps in the early 1900s. A mill town built on cotton and coal, it had the air of prosperity but carried the scars of something older. At the town's edge stood the Ashford Orphan House, a hulking brick building run by the local parish. By day, it was a place of charity. By night, the windows glowed with a sickly light, as if the building itself were watching. Official records called it an institution of mercy, housing children abandoned by poverty, sickness, or war. Yet few of those children were ever seen again once they entered. Locals told of the constant funerals, small wooden coffins lowered into shallow graves behind the church. The official cause was always fever, consumption, or pneumonia. But something did not add up. The number of children buried far exceeded the number admitted. A ledger found years later listed names, hundreds of them, without dates of departure. As if once inside, the children ceased to exist beyond the page. Worse still were the rumors. Townsfolk swore they heard children crying at night long after the fire, their voices drifting on the wind. Some said the church bell rang by itself on certain nights, the sound hollow, like a throat closing around a scream. Brother Matthews was the parish clerk assigned to the orphan house. He was a quiet man, devoted to his records, his handwriting neat and almost feminine. For 20 years, he signed off on every burial, every fever death, every vanished child. In September 1905, he stopped showing up for Mass. His home was found empty. No sign of struggle, no luggage missing. Only his desk remained, littered with unfinished pages. On one page, written over and over until the pen tore through the paper, were the words, "The walls listen." His disappearance was written off as madness, or perhaps an escape from guilt. But one town elder later confessed to seeing him wandering the orphanage grounds at night. His face pale, his mouth moving soundlessly, as though he were speaking to someone only he could see. He carried a candle, and behind him, in the flickering light, there were shadows that did not belong to him. Within weeks, the parish sealed his office, claiming it unfit for use. No one entered again. The fire that consumed the orphan house in 1906 was declared accidental. Official reports blamed faulty wiring, a spark in the attic. But there were no wires in the attic. Witnesses described seeing flames erupt simultaneously from every floor, as though the building itself had chosen to burn. Survivors were almost non-existent. One nun, Sister Agnes, escaped, but she refused to speak about what she saw. For years, she lived in silence, breaking it only once, whispering to a doctor on her deathbed. It wasn't the fire that killed them. It was the opening. Opening what? No record explains. But in the ashes, townsfolk found something more unsettling than charred wood. Melted iron bars twisted into shapes like ribs, as if the building's own skeleton had been reformed in the flames. Beneath the rubble, a shallow pit was uncovered. Inside were bones, too many bones for the number of registered children. And some of the bones were not quite human. The pit was filled with lime, hastily covered, and quietly forgotten. After the fire, townspeople gathered the remains for burial. But among the ashes, they found fragments of identity. Half-burned slips of paper, name tags sewn into clothing, initials etched into small wooden toys. The parish denied these ever existed. The official roster listed only 42 children housed at Ashford that winter, yet over 100 name tags were recovered. Mothers from neighboring towns came forward, claiming they had left their children there after falling into illness or poverty. The parish dismissed them, saying their children had been sent elsewhere. But the women swore they never received word, never saw their little ones again. The truth was harder, more jagged. Someone was taking in children with no intention of letting them leave. And the institution that claimed to be a sanctuary had become a machine of disappearance. What the parish did not know, or pretended not to know, was that children were being spoken of in whispers long before the fire. Workers at the mill swore they heard small hands knocking inside their walls at night. Hunters crossing the woods found shoes no bigger than dolls, arranged in perfect circles. And one farmer's boy confessed to playing with a girl from the orphan house who vanished mid-laughter, dissolving into the air as if swallowed by the silence itself. In 1912, 6 years after the fire, a stonemason was repairing the churchyard when he unearthed a metal box. Inside was a charred ledger, preserved by chance. Its pages, though brittle, were legible enough to make out. The names were there. Rows upon rows of children's names, some crossed out in heavy ink, others underlined. At the top of one page, written in unfamiliar handwriting, was the phrase, "The offering continues." What offering? No priest admitted knowledge. But beneath the names were symbols. Not letters, not numbers, but spirals and jagged lines that matched no known language. They repeated at intervals, growing denser the further the list went on. The stonemason, disturbed by what he found, turned the ledger over to the parish. Weeks later he was dead, crushed beneath a collapsed scaffolding. The ledger vanished into the parish vaults and was never spoken of again. But in the years that followed, new fires broke out. Not just in Ashford. Other orphanages. Other towns. Each time, the official cause was accidental. Each time, the graves filled quicker than anyone could count. The church of Ashford was small, its bell tower rising like a finger pointing to a silent sky. After the fire, parishioners swore the bell rang at night, though the ropes hung untouched. Children in the town claimed to hear voices drifting down with the sound. High, broken voices that spoke their names in the dark. A farmer's wife once climbed the tower to prove it was nothing. She returned pale, unable to speak for days. When she finally did, her voice was cracked and dry. "It isn't the bell that rings. It's the hollow behind it." The priest dismissed it as hysteria, but the sound never stopped. It became part of Ashford's nights, a rhythm of mourning that kept families awake. Some claimed the voices grew louder if you stood barefoot on the church floor, the stone trembling beneath your feet as if something beneath the earth was still moving, still alive.
In 1923, a woman named Clara Reeves testified before a traveling tribunal investigating church-run institutions. She was 70 by then, but her memory was sharp. As a girl, she had lived briefly at the Ashford Orphan House before her aunt retrieved her. Clara described narrow hallways where the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in the candlelight. She recalled nuns whispering prayers not in English, not in Latin, but in a tongue that sounded like sobbing turned inside out. She said the other children grew pale, their eyes sinking into shadows, until one by one they were taken downstairs. What was downstairs? The tribunal asked. Clara began to weep. It wasn't stairs, she whispered. It was a hole. And it kept opening, no matter how many times they filled it. Her testimony was struck from the record. The official minutes labeled her unstable. But years later, when researchers uncovered fragments of the orphanage's foundation, they found a hollow beneath the floor, bricked shut, but scorched from within, as if something once clawed its way out.
By the late 1920s, whispers of Ashford were fading, but fires and disappearances elsewhere stirred suspicion. In Kentucky, an orphanage burned to its foundations in 1927, leaving behind rows of tiny graves. In Pennsylvania, parish records showed more deaths than enrollments. In Mississippi, a seminary collapsed during a flood, revealing a cellar lined with children's shoes pressed into the mud like fossils. The official explanation was always the same: disease, poverty, mismanagement. But investigators noticed a pattern. Each institution was tied to the same religious order that ran Ashford. Each had a ledger with missing pages. Each carried symbols carved into door frames or etched into altars, spirals and jagged marks identical to those found in the charred book. Reporters who tried to pursue the story found themselves reassigned, silenced, or worse. One journalist from Boston wrote of a corridor of silence that runs through the church, before vanishing on a train journey south. His suitcase, when recovered, held only a photograph of the Ashford ruins, folded so many times it had begun to tear. By 1931, Only a handful of people alive remembered Ashford. Most stayed silent, afraid of ridicule or retribution. But a few spoke in secret. A man named Elijah Ward, who had escaped Ashford as a boy, described dreams that haunted him. He saw faces without eyes peering from the corners of rooms, lips moving as if to tell him something he could never quite hear. He said whenever he tried to speak of it, his tongue grew heavy, his words dissolving into gibberish. Another survivor, Sarah Dooley, was institutionalized after claiming that children's voices still followed her into adulthood. Nurses recorded her sitting by the window at night, whispering lullabies to the empty air. Before her death, she left a note beneath her pillow. They were not buried. They were gathered. The question that lingered, gathered by whom? For what purpose? And why did the church seem determined to erase every trace of their existence? Buried deep in the archives of a seminary in Maryland, a historian uncovered fragments of sermons dating back to the 1850s. They spoke of something called the hollow doctrine. At first glance, it seemed like obscure theology, warnings of sin, emptiness, the void left in a godless heart. But the language grew stranger. One passage read, "To feed the hollow is to bind it. To starve it is to open it." Another warned, "The children are nearest to the hollow places, for they are still unsealed." What did this mean? Scholars dismissed it as metaphor. But when compared to Clara Reeves's testimony about the hole that kept opening, the parallels were undeniable. The hollow was not an idea. It was something beneath, something alive, something that demanded sacrifice to remain sealed. And if the children were offerings, then Ashford had not been an accident of cruelty or negligence. It had been ritual.
The church never admitted to the hollow doctrine, but documents from diocesan meetings hinted at financial flows, money channeled to orphanages, then vanishing without explanation. New buildings erected, only to burn within a decade. Families who questioned too loudly found themselves ostracized or quietly relocated. On the surface, charity was the mask. Orphanages provided food, shelter, baptism. Photographs showed smiling sisters, neatly dressed children. But behind the images, ledgers told another story, children arriving but never leaving, institutions rising only to collapse in acts of God. One chilling record from 1909 described the purchase of large quantities of lime, more than required for construction, but exactly the amount needed to dissolve bones in soil. The document was signed by parish officials who later died in accidents. Their deaths ruled coincidence. The deeper researchers looked, the more it seemed the orphan house was not one building, not one fire, but part of a larger cycle and organized silence stretching across decades. And beneath it all, always, was that word scrawled in margins and whispered on deathbeds, the hollow. By the mid-1930s, Ashford itself had become a husk. The mill shut down, families left, and those who remained spoke in low voices. But one thing united them, the dreams. Nightmares spread like contagion. Farmers saw children standing at the edge of their fields, mouths moving without sound. Wives woke to find their husbands sitting upright, whispering in voices not their own. Doctors called it hysteria of the collective, a town infected by memory. Yet one physician, Dr. Alcott, kept a private journal. In it he described dreaming of a staircase spiraling downward, deeper than the earth allowed. At the bottom was not a room, but a pulsing cavity, alive, beating like a heart. And in its rhythm, he heard hundreds of voices crying, not in pain, but in worship. The doctor hanged himself 2 months later. His final note read only, "It is not gone. It waits." The first suggestion that the hollow was not just metaphor came from audio recordings found decades later. A priest in Philadelphia, Father Dunn, had experimented with a new device, an early phonograph. He claimed he wanted to capture choir hymns. Instead, he captured something else. On the wax cylinders, preserved against time, the choir begins to sing. But midway through, their voices falter. Beneath their song, another voice grows. It is low, grinding, like stone against stone. It does not speak in words, but the cadence is deliberate, commanding. The children stop singing. One begins to scream. The recording ends in a burst of static, but when replayed, some listeners swear they hear their own names whispered in the silence after the scream. The church suppressed the cylinders. Father Dunn was reassigned, then found drowned in a river, though no water was in his lungs. The official cause, heart failure. The cylinders were hidden in a vault. But one survived, cracked, warped, yet still carrying the sound of something beneath our world speaking, waiting, and hungering. Between 1800 and 1950, America grew, expanded, industrialized. But for every brick laid and factory raised, something older was buried. Indigenous nations spoke of hollows, sacred sites that were never meant to be disturbed. Cavities in the earth where the ground itself breathed. When settlers came, they built over them. Churches, schools, orphanages. They thought foundations were stronger when laid atop old ground. But the cost was silence. Families disappeared from census rolls. Graves appeared with no names. The institutions standing above these hollows became places of order, control, and secrecy. Not because they were holy, but because they were feeding. Ashford was not unique, it was a symptom. A wound hidden under sermons and paperwork. A wound America refused to look at, because to admit it meant admitting that the institutions protecting children were also delivering them to the dark. The hollow was not just beneath the earth. It was beneath the nation itself. In the ruins of Ashford, decades after the fire, archaeologists uncovered fragments of sandstone etched with strange grooves. They first believed them to be tool marks. But closer study revealed patterns. Spirals. Repeated slashes. Symbols identical to those in the orphanage ledger. One scholar compared them to markings found in abandoned mines in Virginia and Kentucky. Miners had refused to work in those shafts, claiming they heard children where no children were. When the mines collapsed, the same symbols were found scratched into the walls, as if something beneath had tried to write its way out. The language was never translated. But locals said the symbols looked like mouths open, gasping, unending. And when the stones were displayed at a university in 1941, students reported unsettling dreams. One boy carved the symbols into his dormitory desk and then vanished. His roommate swore he was taken in silence, the bed still warm, the sheets sinking inward as if pulled by invisible hands. The stones were removed, locked in a vault. But the dreams spread anyway. In 1944, a veteran named Thomas Calder visited Ashford's ruins. He had fought in Europe, seen firestorms and mass graves, yet claimed nothing haunted him like that crumbled orphanage. He described standing among the blackened bricks when the air grew heavy, pressing down on his lungs. Then he heard it, singing. It was faint at first, like a hymn carried from miles away. But it grew louder, closer, until he swore dozens of voices surrounded him. Children's voices, sweet, unbroken, yet laced with despair. He stumbled back, ears ringing, and saw the ground itself shimmer, as if the ashes were glowing from below. Calder fled, but not before one final sound cut through the hymn, a voice, low and vast, whispering his name. He never returned to Ashford. Weeks later, he shot himself in his home, scrawling across his wall in blood, "The choir is not gone. It sings below us." The final known custodian of Ashford's secrets was Father Elias Hume. By 1949, he was old, frail, but still carried a reputation as the man who saved Ashford's parish from collapse. Privately, he wrote in a series of letters meant never to be opened. In them, he confessed, "We did not build over the hollow. The hollow called us to it." He described dreams shared among the clergy, visions of children offered like candles to keep a greater darkness contained. He admitted they knew the truth, the hollow was not evil in the way men understand evil. It was hunger. Endless, patient hunger. And if the hunger was not fed, it would open, swallowing whole towns. Children were chosen because their souls were closest to that opening, unguarded, unformed. In his final letter, Father Hume wrote, "It sings to me now. I have fed it all my life, but I am tired. When I go, there will be no keeper left. And then it will open again." He died weeks later. His letters vanished from the archive where they were stored. By the early 1950s, Ashford was erased from most maps. The town dissolved, its name spoken only in rumor. The ruins of the orphanage were buried under new soil, its graves left unmarked. But silence lingered. Travelers passing the site reported stalled car engines, watches that stopped ticking, and dreams they could not explain. Some swore they heard children knocking against their windows at night, though no footprints appeared in the morning dew. One soldier returning from Korea said he drove past the overgrown lot and saw the orphanage standing whole again, windows lit, doors open, before it vanished in his rearview mirror. The hollow had not been sealed. It had only grown quiet, waiting. And in that silence, America forgot. Or pretended to forget. The records burned, the testimonies discarded, the graves untended. Yet history has a way of resurfacing. The hunger beneath does not die. It waits for the next offering. If you stand at the edge of Ashford's forgotten cemetery today, the air still feels different, dense, reluctant to move. Grass grows unevenly, and birds do not land. Locals say the ground hums when the church bell tolls in nearby towns, though Ashford's tower has long since fallen. No institution will claim responsibility. No church admits its past. But the pattern is there in towns across America, in burned orphanages, vanished records, graves without names. The hollow was never confined to Ashford. It was never just one place. Perhaps it is not even beneath the ground, but beneath us. Beneath the memory we suppress. Beneath the institutions we trust. And if the stories are true, if the hunger was only bound by silence, then every forgotten child, every missing name, every ledger burned was not lost. They were gathered. Gathered for the day the hollow opens again. Some secrets were never meant to be buried.